Just a few thoughts on one of my favourite bits of Ezekiel. Ezekiel 47, the river of life. The man led me back to the entrance of the temple, and water was coming out from under the entrance and flowing east, the direction the temple faced. It was flowing down from under the south part of the temple, past the south side of the altar. The man then took me out of the temple area by way of the north gate, and led me round to the gate that faces east. A small stream of water was flowing out at the south side of the gate. With his measuring rod, the man measured 500 metres downstream to the east, and told me to wade through the stream there. The water came only to my ankles. Then he measured another 500 metres, and the water came up to my knees. Another 500 metres further down, the water was up to my waist. He measured 500 metres more, and there the stream was so deep I could not wade through it. It was too deep to cross except by swimming. And he said to me, "Mortal man, note all this carefully." Then the man took me back to the bank of the river, and when I got there I saw that there were very many trees on each bank. He said to me, "This water flows through the land to the east and down into the Jordan Valley and to the Dead Sea. When it flows into the Dead Sea, it replaces the salt water of that sea with fresh water. Wherever the stream flows, there will be all kinds of animals and fish. The stream will make the water of the Dead Sea fresh, and wherever it flows, it will bring life. And from the springs of En-gedi all the way to the springs of En-glaim, there will be fishermen on the shore of the sea, and they will spread out their nets to dry, and there will be as many different kinds of fish there as there are in the Mediterranean Sea. But the water in the marshes and ponds along the shore will not be made fresh. They will remain there as a source of salt. And on each bank of the stream, all kinds of trees will grow to provide food. Their leaves will never wither. They will never stop bearing fruit. They will have fresh fruit every month because they are watered by the stream that flows from the temple. The trees will provide food, and their leaves will be used for healing people. This is this great picture of the river of life, which is the river of God's Spirit. We have it throughout the Bible. We have it in Genesis with the creation of the Garden of Eden. Very similar phrases to the multiplicity of plants and animals, and the river flowing from there into the east and the west, the north and the south. We have it again in Revelation with the city of God and the water flowing out. And here we have it. And this evening, as we meet to be open to God, as we've had a bit of silence, we can have a bit of prayer again in a moment. I just want to leave you with this vision, this picture, a promise really, that where we are dry, where there are arid aspects of your life, that doesn't mean any of us are probably completely arid, but where there are dry bits and arid bits of life, where you might think in a relationship or in a sin or a fear or anxiety or a loneliness or a boredom or laziness, there are things that are not happening really, or what are happening is not good. Then the promise of God is that where the river of the water of life flows, there will come new life, fructition, many plants. As Milton would have said, paradise regained. Unlikely as that might be. And we get in Jeremiah where he said, you will be not like the man who doesn't trust in the Lord, and it's just like a few thorn bushes, nothing ever good happens to him. You will be like a tree planted near the river, which puts out its roots to the water, and although it still gets the east wind, is fruitful and survives. This is the promise. And I think I'd like to you to feel this evening at the outset, where am I a bit dry? In energy or morals or hope or wherever it is, where are you dry in your life? The promise of this vision is that where God waters us with the river of life, there new things grow. There is quite literally, in the biblical picture, a new world. In that bit of your world which is dry, there is a new world that is created. And it is a real world. Did you notice in this picture, it's not just a spiritual analogy. They've got all this fresh water right down to the Dead Sea, and it's wonderful stuff, and it's going to be, and this river is going to make everything fresh and clear, everything's going to grow, but they still need salt, one of the most valuable things in those areas. And so they keep some salt pans as well on the side, because this is a practical picture. It's a real picture. God does not want us to have the spirit of freedom and the spirit of blessing and the spirit of everything else if it's just spiritual and we go on in the same wilderness. This is a real vision that would have been understood by the Israelites as real blessing, not just spiritual blessing to help you survive the desert. Many of you might have been brought up with the feeling that Christianity is getting a spiritual river so you can survive the desert. This is a vision of a desert which is changed. Jews don't think like that. It's a practical, positive, and it's ours as well. You know, there's men in this. There's mankind in here. Just as the Garden of Eden is planted, not as an arboretum or sort of the Eden Project, so people can go and look at it. It's planted so people to live in it. And so there are fishermen here, and the plants produce fruit to eat, and fruit that is good for healing. It's our world. You're supposed to be in it. So that is the promise. That the Holy Spirit, counterintuitively, especially if it looks a bit dry at the moment, if you allow the river of life to flow in, that is a transforming power. This is not finding water somewhere else, but in the Lord. And that just brings me to some of the little bits of this vision, which is such a great sort of, call it really, ways into this. It's all very well to say this is the promise. And you think, well, how do I get a handle on this? How do I get in? You see? The vision says the water starts by the altar in the middle of the temple and flows from there. The Jews in the Old Testament had often been aware that they weren't very fertile. They often were aware they were in trouble, and they had sought water all over the place. In other wells, in other places, with other gods, with allies, political and military allies like Egypt and what have you. They'd sought it in their kings who would save them. They'd sought it in their cities which had great walls. Their armies had war horses. They'd sought it in their prophets that they taught what to say when they liked. But it was not good water. You get a great passage again in Jeremiah where he says, "You have forsaken the living waters and instead have hewn your own cisterns, which are cracked and empty." If we are to be refreshed by the Spirit for new life in bits of our lives, we need the right water. We need to know where the source is. From a Christian New Testament point of view, we need to come to Jesus, not just study the river. Too often, charismatic theology sounds a bit like the study of the river. It's all about power and movement and action. Actually, it begins with Jesus. It's at the altar that the water starts. That's where the man goes. He says, come round, he says. Come round and see where it starts. It's by the altar. It's flowing out from the altar. That's where it comes from. It comes from Jesus. And wait for it in humility. The east door of this temple that was being built in Ezekiel's vision is always closed because they felt that God had gone into the temple through it, and so no human would then go through the door. You might think, well, that's a bit sort of abstruse. But it means that the man sees the water, then he takes Ezekiel all around the outside of the temple through the other door, and so he comes to the outside of this door and meets the water coming out. Underneath. For some of you that might be the sort of nightmare of a burst pipe, mightn't it, really? Oh my gosh, I came home and met the water coming out of the door, under the door, But for him, this is an enormous blessing. But it does mean that we wait on the Lord and he sends us his Spirit. You don't assault the door and say, give me your Spirit. We do not lay hold on the horns of the altar. Ezekiel's going to wait and water comes to him. Waiting on God, not beating on God. It's great humility there. So let us come to the water of life rather than some other refreshment system or some other human sprinkler system. We come to the water of life. Some of you will have tried the other sprinkler systems, as I have. It's not good, really. This vision also gives you the feeling that where God might trickle something into your life, small, this is not a sign that there's not much on offer, but is a promise of great things to come. This small trickle of water that comes out of the temple then flows across the desert area to the east towards the Dead Sea. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it's a huge torrent and finished up by filling the whole sea with fresh water. I love this bit because from my geographical past, I'm thinking, wow, what a river this is. Now, you're used to a river getting bigger, aren't you? Because we live in a temperate climate. So that, the Tamar gets bigger from its source out to the sea. So does the Thames or the Trent or something like that. Because water is always being added all the way along by tributaries. But that doesn't happen with rivers that rise in the mountains and then flow across deserts in Africa and in Asia. As they flow across the desert, they get smaller and smaller. Because nothing is added, but there is evaporation and sinkage into the ground. And in fact, many of the great rivers finish up never reaching the sea, but actually finish up in some sort of bog somewhere. And so Ezekiel would have never seen this because this is not a geographical illustration. This is a vision, a counterintuitive vision. And so it is for us, because I don't know about you, but I often feel that I might start the day or start the week with a degree of inspiration and strength and energy. And as I go on, I get less and less and less. I get tireder and tireder, or I get more and more tempted, or more fed up, or whatever it is. And I'm like a river that's flowing through the sand and slowly getting smaller and smaller until I sink in. The vision says this is not how God is. So do not be upset when there is only a trickle of water into a dry part in your life. It might just be a drip. But it is a promise of greater things. It is not, as we would normally think, well, there isn't much now, so there's not going to be much to come. I think this is a prophetic word for our churches. We have been told there aren't many of us and there will become less. That's a human way of looking at it. The divine way is there's not much now, and that's a promise of great things to come. That's what the Ezekiel vision is, a little dribble. And Ezekiel couldn't have made it up because he'd never seen it. So in your own life you might think, well, that's not much, but my goodness, this presages something much greater that God could do here and here and here. So tonight, you might just pray in a few minutes, Lord, I pray that I should feel a trickle into a dry place. And I think that's very encouraging because you may have been brought up to feel that somehow it had to be an entire waterfall or tsunami before spiritually anything ever happened. But actually it's not true. It starts with a trickle under the door of the house of the Lord. But just one more thing. This man takes Ezekiel down to measure the river. Now he's got a rod, but he decides not to use the rod. He measures the distance down and then says to Ezekiel, you go in and see how deep it is. So he goes in and it's ankle deep. He goes on a bit further and he goes in again. It's knee deep. He goes a bit further on, it's waist deep. And then he goes on a bit further and it's too deep. And he says it's getting more and more difficult. But the great picture here is, if I am going to be blessed by the river of life of God's Spirit, I need to get in it. I need to be immersed in it. This is not a sort of an exercise in studying rivers. And Ezekiel standing on the beach and says, it's an amazing river, isn't it? You know? Which we could have been doing for decades in church, thinking, wow, what great theology this is, great river. But unless you get into it, it doesn't happen. How immersed are you going to be? It's a fantastic picture. Are you ankle deep? On a hot day, being ankle deep is quite good, really. You get nice, cool feet. Oh, it was a nice service. I was very blessed, sort of thing, But then up to your knees. you know, and it's a bit more sort of wet, isn't it? More difficult to move around. It says up to your waist in the New English Bible. In the good old Bible, it says loins. Loins is always the bit where you get and it's very cold, isn't it? You think, oh, I don't want to get that bit. You see? That's true, isn't it? Is it, you know, going into water in a river, you know, it's not, you know, easy. And the further you go, the worse it gets. It's up to his neck. He says, I can't walk in this. You know, anybody ever done exercising in water? You know, it's terrible. It's a challenge. How far in do we want to get? Or do we want to stand there at the top end with the dribble, ankle deep, and thinking, where are the trees? They're down there where it's deeper, you know. Lord, will I throw myself into you? Who is it says in the Old Testament? I was in the Spirit on the Lord's day. In the Spirit. I was in the realm. Yeah? And although he brings him back at the end to the bank and says, I want to talk about the forest, this great fruition, I always think, when you get deeper and deeper and deeper, it gets harder and harder and harder until you swim. And then you think, oh, yes, that's what I should be doing all along, you know. Like swimming in shallow water is, I remember when I used to go to the swimming pool with my young daughters, we had to swim in the shallow end when they were small. You need to bang your knees on the bottom. You know, and they say, well, let's go up the deep end where we can swim. And people say, you might drown up there. Oh, come on. It's a matter about swimming, isn't it? I spent half my life keeping 1 foot on the bottom. It was this deep and that deep and that deep and that deep. And then you just went with the flow. All you could do was swim. I've got this vision of sort of Ezekiel just taking off, going with the flow. And he said, this is so much better than struggling with the water as it got deeper and deeper. I think it's a great picture. So this evening, as we just have a time when we might come and just say, Lord, I'm a bit dry here and dry here and dry here, which, as I said to you last month, is not a life crisis, but could be. We might be saying, Lord, release your water to flow or to dribble or to just trickle into my dry places with forgiveness and healing, but above all with new life. Let's see what grows. See, the promise is it will grow, and the promise is that a small thing will lead to something larger. But you've got to get in. You've got to get in.